Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The air was thick with the weight of ages. Dust swirled lazily in the dim light of the crumbling ruins, the remnants of what had once been a grand temple hidden deep within the farthest reaches of Middle-earth. Gandalf, the Grey Wizard, stood at the entrance, his sharp eyes tracing the ancient carvings that adorned the stone walls. The language was long dead, its meaning forgotten by all but the wisest of the wise, but Gandalf recognized it traces of a time before even the Great Wars, when magic had shaped the world in ways now unimaginable. The wind whispered softly, carrying with it a faint echo of forgotten spells. Gandalf's hand tightened on his staff, his mind whirling with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The ruins called to him, beckoning him forward, though every instinct told him to tread carefully. Legends of this place had reached his ears long ago. A temple once used by an ancient order of sorcerers, destroyed in the final battle against a force so dark that its name had been stricken from all known records. He stepped forward, his boots stirring up clouds of dust, the silence around him amplifying the faint sound of his movements. There was no immediate threat, but he could feel the power here, lingering in the very stones. Whatever had happened in this temple, it was not finished. Magic still clung to the air, thick and heavy, waiting for someone foolish or brave enough to uncover its secrets. Gandalf paused before the entrance, an archway carved into the face of the temple, half collapsed with age but still imposing in its sheer scale. Ancient runes marked the threshold, words set by powerful hands long gone. He studied them, muttering to himself as he traced the symbols with his finger. They were not meant to keep anyone out, but rather to keep something within. "This is no mere ruin," Gandalf murmured, his voice low, thoughtful. "There is still magic here." With a deep breath, he raised his staff and whispered a word of power. The runes flared to life, glowing faintly with a sickly green light before fading into the stone once more. The archway trembled, and the ancient door that had been sealed for centuries slid open with a groaning protest. Gandalf stepped inside. The temperature dropped instantly, the chill of the forgotten past seeping into his bones. The hall stretched out before him, vast and dark, the walls lined with towering pillars that seemed to go on forever into the shadows. Faint glimmers of light danced across the floor, runes embedded in the stone, guiding him deeper into the belly of the temple. He followed them, his staff tapping lightly against the ground, his senses alert to every flicker of movement, every whisper of magic. As he walked, he could feel the ancient magic that saturated the very air, a powerful enchantment that had been set long ago, meant to protect or perhaps to trap. But from what? Gandalf had heard tales of a dark entity sealed away in the deep places of the earth, its name lost to time, its very existence a myth. Could this be its prison? Ahead, the corridor widened into a vast chamber. At its center stood an enormous stone circle, etched with intricate designs that shimmered faintly in the dim light. It was a magic array, one that pulsed with an energy that seemed both ancient and alive, waiting to be awakened. Gandalf approached cautiously, his eyes narrowing as he studied the array. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, its complexity beyond even the great works of the elves. And yet, something about it was familiar, something he could not quite place. The moment his foot crossed the threshold of the array, the air shifted, the ground beneath him rumbled, and before he could react, the stone circle lit up with a blinding white light. Gandalf felt the pull of magic, a force far stronger than anything he had anticipated. It wrapped around him like a vice, dragging him into the heart of the array before he could muster any defense. And then, with a deafening crack, the world shifted. Gandalf found himself standing in a completely different space. The chamber was gone, replaced by a vast maze of towering stone walls, their surfaces covered in glowing runes. The ceiling stretched high above him, vanishing into darkness, and the air hummed with power raw, untamed, and dangerous. He had been transported into the array. Gandalf's eyes swept across the new surroundings, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. The array was a triple labyrinth designed not just to imprison but to test, and he was now trapped within it. "This is no ordinary place," Gandalf murmured, gripping his staff tightly. "I must find a way out, before it's too late." The air was still, unnaturally so, as if even time itself was caught in the array's spell. The first challenge presented itself almost immediately. Before him stood a massive stone door, its surface covered in shifting symbols or runes that required translation to unlock. Gandalf knelt, examining the markings closely. They were in an ancient tongue, one that only the most learned of wizards could decipher. Fortunately, Gandalf was one of the few who could. The runes told a riddle, a puzzle that needed to be solved before the door would yield. Gandalf spoke the answer aloud, his voice echoing through the empty halls, and the door shuddered, groaning as it slid open. But the moment it did, a blast of icy wind rushed through the corridor, and from the darkness beyond, a shadowy figure emerged, an ethereal guardian of the maze, its form shifting and indistinct. It moved with inhuman speed, its cold, empty eyes fixed on Gandalf. Without hesitation, Gandalf raised his staff, summoning a protective barrier of light just as the creature lunged toward him. The impact was fierce, the guardian's claws scraping against the magical shield with a sound like nails on stone. Gandalf held his ground, his mind focused on maintaining the barrier while his free hand wove a spell of binding. With a shout of command, the spell took hold, wrapping the creature in chains of light and freezing it in place. The guardian hissed, its form flickering, and then it vanished, dissolving into the air like smoke. Gandalf lowered his staff, breathing heavily. He had barely begun his journey through the maze, and already he could feel the weight of its challenges. Each step forward would demand both his magical strength and his wits. But he had no choice, yet there was no going back. He pressed on, passing through another corridor that twisted and turned, the walls seeming to shift as he moved. The air grew warmer, and the runes on the walls began to glow with a brighter, more malevolent light. Ahead, a faint rumbling could be heard, like the distant growl of some enormous beast. As Gandalf approached, the walls opened up into a larger chamber, and at its center, a massive creature awaited him, an elemental, born of stone and fire. Its form towering over Gandalf like a living mountain. Its eyes burned with a fierce, molten heat, and as it moved, the ground beneath it trembled. Gandalf's heart quickened. He had fought such creatures before, but never in a place like this, where the very environment seemed to bend to the will of the maze. The elemental roared, and with a thunderous step, it charged. Gandalf reacted instinctively, raising his staff and calling upon the forces of water and air. A torrent of icy wind surged forward, crashing into the elemental with a hiss of steam. But the creature was not so easily defeated. It shrugged off the attack, swinging its massive fist down toward the wizard. Gandalf narrowly dodged, rolling to the side as the fist slammed into the ground, sending cracked spiderwebbing through the stone floor. He couldn't win with brute force, and not here. He needed to outsmart the beast. His mind raced, and then it struck him at the runes on the walls. They pulsed with the same energy as the creature. They were connected, feeding it power. If he could disrupt the flow of magic between the runes and the elemental, he might be able to weaken it. With renewed determination, Gandalf moved quickly, casting spells that targeted the runes, unraveling the ancient magic that fueled the beast. Each rune he disrupted caused the elemental to falter, its movements growing slower, more erratic. Finally, with a powerful incantation, Gandalf severed the last connection, and the elemental let out a roar of agony before collapsing into a pile of lifeless stone. Gandalf stood over the remnants of the creature, his chest heaving. The battle had taken a toll on him, but he had won. For now, as the dust settled, Gandalf glanced around the chamber, his eyes narrowing. This was only the beginning. The maze was vast, and its dangers were far from over. But as he pressed on, a chilling realization crept into his mind. The deeper he ventured, the stronger the dark presence became. Somewhere, deep within the heart of this maze, An ancient evil was stirring. And if Gandalf didn't find a way out soon, it might awaken. He whispered a quiet prayer to the Valar, steeling himself for what was to come. Gandalf moved swiftly through the winding corridors of the maze, his heart pounding with the urgency of the growing darkness. The further he traveled, the more he could feel the weight of the ancient evil pressing down on him. It was not just the maze itself that was testing him. Something much older and far more dangerous lurked at the core of this place, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The air grew thick, and the walls of the labyrinth seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible hum. Each step brought him closer to the heart of the array, where the true challenge lay. He could feel the pull of the magic Hiri and enchantment so strong it vibrated in his bones. His every instinct told him to turn back, to retreat from the growing threat, but Gandalf knew there was no retreating. Not now. The next chamber he entered was vast, its ceiling so high that it disappeared into shadow. At the center of the room stood a massive, intricately designed pedestal, atop which hovered a glowing crystal orb. The orb pulsed with energy, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Gandalf's sharp eyes quickly caught the patterns of the orb was not merely a beacon of light. It was a key, the next puzzle he would have to solve. As he approached the pedestal, he felt the temperature around him drop dramatically. Frost began to form on the stone floor beneath his feet, and his breath fogged in the air. A cold, sinister presence filled the room, and from the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in darkness. It was not a physical being, but rather a manifestation of magic, a dark specter that had been summoned to guard the orb. Its form shifted and twisted as it moved, an embodiment of fear and cold, its hollow eyes locked onto Gandalf with malevolent intent. Without hesitation, it lunged forward, its claw-like hands extended toward him. Gandalf acted quickly, raising his staff to summon a barrier of light. The specter slammed into it, shrieking as the magical shield repelled it. But the creature was persistent. It circled the wizard, probing for weaknesses, its movements swift and unpredictable. Gandalf knew he couldn't simply outlast the specter. This was another test, and time was running short. He focused on the orb, studying the intricate patterns etched into the pedestal. It was a magical lock, tied to the specter itself. If he could find a way to manipulate the runes on the pedestal, he could sever the connection between the creature and the orb. But the specter was relentless, attacking the barrier with renewed fury. Gandalf's concentration faltered for a moment, and a sharp pain shot through his chest as the creature's icy claws grazed his skin. He gritted his teeth, his grip on the staff tightening as he channeled his energy into maintaining the shield. His eyes darted back to the pedestal, and he saw Ida the key rune, hidden among the intricate designs. With a surge of determination, Gandalf lowered his staff, allowing the barrier to drop for a split second. The specter lunged forward, but Gandalf was faster. He reached out and touched the key rune, muttering an incantation under his breath. The pedestal trembled, and the orb flashed brightly as the spell took effect. The specter let out an ear-piercing scream as its form began to dissolve, its connection to the orb severed. In a matter of moments, the creature was gone, leaving only the pulsing glow of the orb behind. Gandalf exhaled slowly, his heart still racing from the encounter. He had passed yet another test, but he could feel his strength waning. The maze was taking its toll, draining his energy with each challenge he faced. But there was no turning back. He had to press on. He reached out and touched the orb, feeling a surge of warmth as it responded to his touch. The room around him began to shift, the walls melting away like mist, revealing yet another corridor leading deeper into the labyrinth. Gandalf hesitated for a moment, gathering his strength before stepping forward. The corridor was narrow, the walls close enough that his staff nearly scraped against them as he walked. The air was thick with a scent of ancient magic, and Gandalf could feel the presence of the dark god growing stronger with each step. He had to be getting close. Suddenly, the corridor widened into a small chamber, and Gandalf found himself facing a massive stone door. The door was covered in runes, but these were different from the ones he had encountered before. They were darker, more menacing, pulsing with a malevolent energy. These runes were not meant to test us, they were meant to keep something inside. Gandalf's heart sank as he realized what lay beyond the door. This was it, the heart of the maze, the place where the dark god had been sealed away for millennia. And now, Gandalf stood at the threshold, knowing that the final challenge awaited him. He approached the door cautiously, his eyes scanning the runes for any sign of a trap. The magic here was ancient, older than anything he had encountered in his long life. It pulsed with a dark energy, a force that seemed to claw at him, seeking to corrupt and twist his very essence. Gandalf raised his staff and spoke a word of power. The runes flared to life, and the door began to tremble. Slowly, with a sound like grinding stone, it opened, revealing a vast, dark chamber beyond. The air inside was stifling, heavy with the presence of the dark god. At the center of the chamber, suspended in midair by chains of glowing light, was a massive, shadowy figure. Its form was indistinct, shifting and writhing like smoke, but Gandalf could feel the power radiating from it. This was the ancient evil that had been sealed away long ago, the dark god whose awakening would bring destruction to all of Middle-earth. Gandalf stepped into the chamber, his heart pounding in his chest. He had come this far, but now, standing in the presence of the dark god, he realized just how dangerous this moment truly was. The seals that held the god in place were weakening, and every step Gandalf had taken through the maze had brought the dark god closer to awakening. The god stirred, its eyes flickering open for the first time in millennia. They were eyes of pure darkness, filled with malice and rage. Gandalf could feel the pull of the god's power, a force so strong it threatened to overwhelm him. But Gandalf was not afraid. He had faced great evils before, and he would face this one too. He raised his staff, calling upon the full extent of his power, and began to weave a spell that would strengthen the seals and trap the dark god once more. The god roared, its voice shaking the very foundations of the chamber. The chains of light strained against its power, but Gandalf held firm, his voice steady as he chanted the ancient incantations. The light of the seals flared brighter, and the god howled in fury as it was forced back into its prison. For a moment, it seemed as though Gandalf might succeed. But then, with a deafening crack, one of the seals shattered. The dark god surged forward, its chains breaking one by one. Gandalf's heart raced. He had to act quickly, or all would be lost. He poured every ounce of his strength into the spell, but it wasn't enough. The god was too strong, too ancient, and the seals were too weak. And then, in that moment of desperation, Gandalf realized what he had to do. The only way to truly stop the dark god from escaping was to bind himself to the seals, to use his own power to reinforce them. It would mean giving up a part of himself, weakening his own magic forever, but it was the only way. With a deep breath, Gandalf made his decision. He spoke the final words of the incantation, and a blinding light filled the chamber as the seals flared to life once more. The dark god let out a final, furious roar as it was pulled back into its prison, the chains of light binding it tighter than ever before. Gandalf felt the drain on his power as the seals took hold, drawing strength from him to maintain their hold on the god. He staggered, his body weakened, but he had done it. The dark god was sealed once more, and Middle-earth was safe. For now. The light faded, and Gandalf stood alone in the chamber, breathing heavily. His strength was nearly gone, but he had succeeded. He had stopped the dark god from escaping, and the endless magic array had been restored. With a weary sigh, Gandalf turned and began the long journey back through the maze. The challenges had been great, but he had overcome them. And though he was weaker now, he knew that his sacrifice had been worth it. As he reached the exit of the maze, Gandalf paused for a moment, looking back at the ancient ruins. The dark god was sealed away, but the threat had not been eliminated. One day, someone else might stumble upon this place, just as he had. And when that day came, they would have to be ready. But for now, Middle-earth was safe. Gandalf stepped out into the light of the sun, his heart heavy but his mind clear. He had done what needed to be done, and though his power had been diminished, his spirit remained strong. The battle against darkness was far from over.